Good evening. Welcome to Novara Live. Coming up tonight, details of Henry Nowak's fatal mistreatment by police are seized on by far-right agitators, culminating in violent unrest in Southampton. We discuss Peter Thiel's latest attempts to construct a parallel justice system and what you can do to fight back. West Streeting offers up some too little too late rhetoric. And how did Reform's Makerfield candidate fare when attempting to answer for his pungent past statements? My name's Stephen Methven, and tonight I'm joined by Barry Malone. Barry, how are you?
Hi, how are you, Stephen? Good to be with you.
Very
been a
good.
while since we were together.
It's been a little while, but a little bird tells me that you've got a new podcast out at the moment. Why don't you tell us about it?
Oh, thank you for teeing me up for the plug, Stephen. I love you. I have a newsletter, a Substack newsletter, in which every day I highlight 3 non-Western news stories briefly. It's totally free. And so now...
that's Proximities.
That's Proximities, yeah. Yes. Thank you for helping me with the plug. And people can find that at proximities.news. So now I've started a podcast, also called Proximities. It's on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. And in it, it'll be sort of the same thing. I'll be talking to the journalists who are covering the non-Western stories that often get underreported. So the first episode is up, and it is a conversation with the Al Jazeera English correspondent in Sudan, Hiba Morgan.
Great.
So please check it out.
Yeah, I haven't listened to it yet, but I will.
Thank you.
Now, if you'd like to support our work, you can sign up at novaramedia.com/support. You can also listen to the show on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And don't forget to let us know what you think in the comments below.
That was completely unnecessary.
Now, those were just some of the scenes of violence that swept across parts of Southampton last night. What began as protests in the wake of the killing of 18-year-old student Henry Nowak in Southampton last December quickly turned to violence as crowds at the rally turned to attacking the police. Those riots followed the release of body cam footage of Nowak's last moments on Tuesday, showing the fatally stabbed teenager handcuffed, on his knees, and pleading for his life as attending police dismissed his cries of "I can't breathe." But it wasn't just an organic eruption of distress from concerned citizens, with anger seemingly whipped up by politicians apparently keen to exploit a truly horrific crime. Stephen Yaxley Lennon, also known as Tommy Robinson, posted this on X before the violence broke out.
Why was this Sikh man not charged with a hate crime? He made it about race when he rang the police and said white boy, and he accused him of racism, so it was a racial murder. That's what this was. He was racially targeted by that man, and he was murdered, and your police officer's done nothing because he was white. Because you were so scared of this. So the officer who handcuffed him, the officer ignored his plea after plea after plea for an ambulance. He's been stabbed. They fucking ignored him. Would they have ignored him if he was non-white? You bet your life they went off, because their training wouldn't have allowed them to. This all comes down to police training, government training. The hierarchy of the police, the head of that police is responsible. Your hands are dirty because you created this atmosphere. Not just the handcuffing officer, you, the government, Keir Starmer, every one of you brought in these policies that attack white people. That's what it is. This is an attack. We're targeted by every government institution with hate against us. An unfair system has been created. An unfair system of funding, an unfair system of love, care, of everything. And it's against white people.
Now that extremely, as you could see there, enraged message ended with a call to congregate at Southampton police station. Robinson had some remarks to make there too.
Henry's murder I've spoke about this for 20 years. I said you'll be a victim of a race gang, i.e. Pakistani Muslims, will be beating up a white kid. The police will turn up, they jump on the white kid. Every time, I've seen it my whole life. They jump on the white kid. What the whole world has now seen in Henry's video is what we all know anyway. It's a different treatment for white people compared to non-whites. And we've seen this spread through every single institution in our country. I can't breathe. The crying, the pleading. Do you know what's insane right now? Is you see that scumbag's brother who should be charged for perverting the course of justice. He fucking lied.
And the father.
And a message to anyone who wants to claim representative communities, get that fucking family out of Southampton.
Yes, get them all! Fuck them all!
People in the crowd seemed to take up that call, with hundreds walking across the city to the neighborhood where Nowak was killed and where the family home of his murderer, Vikram Digwa, is located. As you could see there, crowds threw wheelie bins, bottles, and other objects at the police as officers tried to stop them from reaching the house. Some in the crowds also threw bricks, with this officer being hit at fairly close range by a large block. For others, it was Nazi salutes rather than bricks that were thrown. And as evening turned to night, some rioters set fires in skips before trying to drive them into the police. There was also this moment when rioters decided to storm some bushes outside an apartment building on the road where Henry Nowak was killed. Now, Tommy Robinson wasn't the only recognizable figure present in the crowds last night. Former actor Lawrence Fox was there, calling the fury of the crowd justified and telling them to fight the police. Now, we played this clip at the top of the story, but the man with the bob at the front is reported to be Luke Jan, the Portsmouth organizer of the National Rebirth Party. The National Rebirth Party is a fascist party with its leader, Alec Yerbury, styling himself on Adolf Hitler, according to Byline Times. Also, according to Byline Times, Jane was pictured alongside members of the neo-Nazi group White Vanguard. According to Hampshire Police, 11 officers and a police dog were injured in the violent demonstration. Chief Constable Alex Boone also said this: "What we as a society cannot accept is the violent scenes we saw in Southampton last night. Some clearly arrived intent on causing disorder and trouble. We saw bottles thrown, makeshift weapons used, damage caused to the homes and vehicles of innocent residents, and threats and violence directed towards our officers. While we're forced to deal with those determined to spark fear and division, our finite resources are taken away from those who need it most." Of course, it wasn't only the police who were at risk during those riots. They took place in largely residential streets in Southampton. One of the city's residents told Sky what she'd experienced.
Carnage, really, for 4 hours.
Just describe what you saw out of your windows, what was happening.
Bricks were being thrown, a bin was set on fire and pushed through the police line. Bottles, cans, all sorts. I think a lot of walls and bins, chairs, all sorts.
How are you feeling witnessing this?
Terrified. I've never felt unsafe in my house and I just wanted to get out of there, but I couldn't.
Barry, let's talk about that violence last night. Quite some shocking scenes there. I mean, I think anyone who saw the body cam footage yesterday of young Henry Nowak basically dying at the feet of the police while trying to tell them he'd been stabbed, and a policeman saying, "I don't think you have, mate." Very dismissive attitude, while the perpetrator stood by claiming that he'd been hit in the eye and pointing at an unbruised eye, and claiming a racial attack. No one can see all of that and fail to be, infuriated by it, really angry with the behavior of the police officers, very, very angry with the perpetrator, the murderer in this case. Does any of that, do you think, warrant the kinds of scenes and the kinds of people in some cases that we saw last night?
Yeah, I agree with you. I did watch the video and I felt exactly like you say. I felt infuriated and I felt sick in my stomach. And, actually with you recounting it, I felt kind of sick again. It was horrible, horrible to watch. And there is clearly a massive police failing there. And I think we have seen similar things before. I would suggest that if somebody is on the ground and they tell a police officer that they're stabbed, then the police officer should take that bloody seriously. Instead of, as you say, that horribly dismissive, "I don't think you have, mate." If somebody tells you that they can't breathe, I would suggest that you don't handcuff them and read them their rights. I mean, it was horrible. But does it justify what happened last night? Of course not. I mean, what we have no evidence of is that it was a racially aggravated attack, whatever Tommy Robinson might say. And I think that it's clear that a lot of the people who were there last night were cynically weaponizing it. I mean, if you look at the footage outside the police station, they couldn't even get through a minute's silence. They said that they were going to have a minute's silence and then they all talked over it, shouted over it. What I saw no evidence of was actual care for Henry Nowak or care for his family, who said specifically that they didn't want this to happen. And it doesn't appear like some kind of local outpouring of anger. Because we just saw there a local woman say that she was terrified. I'm sure the vast majority of people who live around there were terrified. And what we saw in those clips were essentially fascists travel from other parts of the country to rabble rouse. And also what we saw in that clip was it wasn't local people. Local people were there, I'm not denying that. But it wasn't local people in the front line attacking the police. It was fascists who traveled. So, I mean, the whole thing, I think, was a disgrace. Felt peripherally related to the horrible murder of Henry Nowak and felt utterly disrespectful of his family's wishes.
Yeah, the topic of what the family asked for in terms of politicization is going to come up again in a second. I mean, I guess, I think you're right about local residents, right? When these sorts of things happen in your neighborhood, the response isn't normally to go out and start smashing up the place where you live, right? The response normally is to be sort of traumatized by what's happened and then, to talk to each other, go and address the police, go and find out what's happened. But, they're very clear that people were there to have a fight, right? It's very clear that, people were there to break things up. I mean, people don't run down their own streets picking up wheelie bins and throwing them all over the place and tipping out rubbish all over the shop, right? Those are outsiders. But what do you think about, I mean, it's so hard sometimes in the realm of the emotions to separate things out. As we said, we both felt very angry and very sickened by that videotape. I can imagine there are lots of people who feel angry and sickened and are less measured. What's the argument that these people aren't just those less measured people who feel the same things as us? What's the argument that they're there, for reasons of political rage?
Well, because you look at who's in the crowd. Yes, there are local people who've turned up. By the way, some of those young lads just turn up for a ruck. I mean, there's no doubt about that. I've seen the same thing in Ireland where we'll have an incident like this and groups of people young lads will just show up for a chance to throw bins at the police. But I think when you look at the makeup of the crowd and you look at the people who've traveled, and it wasn't just those fascists standing in the front, there were many other people who had traveled there to take part in this. Tommy Robinson was there. He'd gone there to take part in this. Lawrence Fox was there. He'd gone there to take part in this. Look, I'm not discounting that there are people who may feel anger and express it violently. However, here's the key. They weren't angry at the police because of the horrific, cack-handed way that they handled that poor 18-year-old guy while he was dying on the ground. They're angry with the murderer because he's a Sikh. That's what we heard. It's them who are racially aggravating this thing.
Yeah, there's no one is calling for, none of those people there are calling for better protocols of how you treat people when they're saying that they're injured. So for example, not handcuffing them. What they're talking about is the racial element of this. They're sort of trying to set a fire under some kind of, the idea that there is some kind of anti-white discrimination amongst institutions in this country.
Well, lots of them were interviewed on camera. Whether that was, there was a lot of sort of, there was a couple of influencers there who were talking to them. We heard what they had to say. You're right. Nobody said, well, I think that the police need new training and different protocols. No, it was all, remigration now, mass deportation now, and that's how we know because they speak. They're not shy to speak. And so the people in the crowd last night made it very clear what motivated them to be there.
Yeah. Let's go on to another bit of this story. One figure who wasn't present at last night's riots in Southampton was Reform UK leader Nigel Farage, who released this speech yesterday.
Think of this. The biggest fear a police officer now has going about his or her duty on the street is the fear of being reported for having acted in a way that was racially biased. That fear, now greater than dealing with a dying man living on the ground. Henry's family have responded to this in just the most extraordinarily dignified way. But I suggest the rest of us respond to this with pure, cold rage. This is wrong. All the values and standards of living in a free country where everybody is judged equally before the law have been trashed and thrown away. And yet, what has the public reaction been from our leaders and politicians, and indeed, to be frank, much of the media to this? Silence. Absolute silence. Proof, if ever there was any, that we're living in a two-tier culture in this country where the rights and privileges of white people matter less than those of ethnic minorities. We need a change in culture.
And I think what's really interesting about Farage's speech yesterday is that he's prescriptive about what people should feel about this. He says, I think we should respond, or you should respond, with pure, cold rage. And I think that's the moment, in my view, that this tips over into some kind of call for action, right? Politicians don't normally tell you how you should feel about something. Normally, they understand that you may feel a certain way, but they don't prescribe it to you. And of course, as we said before, people are understandably very angry over the death of Henry Nowak. And as we said before, nobody should die like that, terrified, unlistened to, and handcuffed. But I think it's that phrase, that prescription of how people should respond emotionally, and therefore also in action, to the death, to the body cam footage, that's raised questions over whether Farage was inciting violence in that broadcast. This was Labour MP Joe White, Reform politician Layla Cunningham, and former police officer Leroy Logan on Newsnight last night.
I think this was an incitement by Nigel Farage, and that's exactly what we had. And what makes me even sadder is the barrage of hate that's gone out by the online warriors towards the family. The family wanted calm. Their ask was that we focused on knife crime and that we worked to stop knife crime. They wanted us to focus on the murder of their son. And they're very clear, they were fearful that this would be the reaction. And as a consequence of that, the family are now experiencing hate online. And that's not where we should be as a country.
Layla, I'll let you respond to that claim of incitement.
I think that video is what's incited this anger. It's incited anger in all of us. And naming that anger, as Nigel did in the video, is not what's causing division. It's actually telling people to be quiet and they can't deal with it. In naming it, we can deal with it and make sure that Nowak never happens again. I mean, we saw it. The problem is the accusation of racism carries such weight that and public servants are so scared of getting the race issue wrong that it affects their operational decision. And that can lead to lethal.
Let me bring in Leroy on the protests and what we were seeing in Southampton.
Well, if anyone is telling me that when you run off your mouth to say rage and White Lives Matter and this two-tier policing, which is not evidence-based at all, that doesn't impact on people assembling outside a police station and then going on to other addresses, you're fooling yourself. This is clearly cause and effect.
Now, just to point out what Layla Cunningham said there, she said that Nigel Farage names what people are feeling in that video. He doesn't name what people are feeling. He says how they should feel. He said they should respond with cold, hard rage. That's not the same as naming something. That's prescribing what people should do. That's, to some people, perhaps a dog whistle about how they should respond. Logan went on with that argument that he was making just then.
When politicians don't realise the impact of their words, and just like he was saying, the family said, please do not use my son in that way. And you still go and do it. And there's no apology from your side. I think it's ludicrous.
Apology for what Nigel pointed...
for the impact of what has been said. It is clear that people have been incited by what Nigel Farage and other people in Reform have said. I'll finish with this.
You're accusing,
in 1990, I'm not accusing, it's plain as day. In 1999, with the Methven report, they were saying the same thing. Oh, police officers don't know how to deal with black people, or they'd be called racist and all this. We had it, but policing went on. It wasn't perfect. In fact, the systemic failures are still the same. Black people are still 8 times more likely to be stopped by white police officers. Black people are 8 times more likely to be stopped by police than their white counterparts. Death in police contact, the same sort of disparities. And internally, black officers are 4 times more likely to be disciplined than everything. So the systemic failures are there, but we still move on. The difference is we've now got Reform.
Now, Logan took particular issue with Reform's unapologetic approach to the riots. That attitude was, in my opinion, also pretty clear in another interview last night when Reform's Home Affairs spokesperson Zia Yusuf appeared on Sky News.
Nigel Farage issued a statement on camera calling for people to respond with pure, cold rage. That's incitement, isn't it?
Did you watch the body cam footage, Kathy?
I did watch the body cam footage, and I also watched Nigel
and what
Farage's
emotions did you feel? Kathy, what emotion did you feel having watched it?
I'm asking you whether that's incitement.
With respect, I'm asking you what emotion you felt having watched
but
the body
I'm
cam
conducting
footage
this interview,
of
so
Henry
I'm
Nowak,
asking you. I'm asking
of
you
Henry Nowak
if
being
that
read
is
his
incitement.
rights, having been arrested, Kathy. Henry Nowak's the last words Henry heard on this earth were his rights having been arrested by the police, bleeding to death. And my question to you, genuinely, it's a sincere question, human to human, Kathy.
Zia,
how did you feel watching that footage?
Zia, if you could let me ask my question, it's absolutely heartbreaking. And that is why the family said they wanted to turn that into something that would not create more division. I'm asking you if Nigel Farage suggesting to people that they feel cold, pure cold rage, is that inciting people to feel anger?
Well, Kathy, you have not answered my question, which is what emotion did you feel having watched that body cam footage?
I'm interviewing you, so I would like you to ask that question. Is that incitement or not? It's simple.
Okay, well, I will tell you, having watched that footage myself, I was furious about it. I think millions of people in this country of all sorts of races and religions, based on the people who are speaking to me and sending me messages constantly, they were absolutely furious about it as well, because it was a crystal clear example of two-tier policing. And how on earth the police, upon attending the scene, took more seriously an accusation of racism than an accusation of having been stabbed. Paul Henry said repeatedly to the police, that I've been stabbed. And the police said, and this is burnt into my memory now, it's so horrifying, the police responded with, I quote, "I don't think you have, mate."
I mean, I don't know about you, but like I don't feel particularly trustful of a politician at a time when there's been not only a murder of an innocent young man who's been let down by the police 100%, not only under those circumstances, but when there's been an outpouring of real violence on the streets of a city in this country. I don't think I can really trust a politician who, in trying to respond in a political way, in a way that sort of looks ready for government, they treat the journalists asking them questions as though it's a sort of game, as though it's really just about point scoring, as though there's no matter of substance here, except for the fact that the person is a mainstream journalist. And, you know, like, don't get me wrong, I have like so many issues with journalists in the mainstream media. I think often they have things that they need to answer for. But, you know, this is a moment of sort of national interest and of, as we saw, fascists and in some cases Nazis out amongst other people who are not those things on the streets of Southampton. And yeah, it doesn't fill me with much confidence that someone aspiring to be the government of this country can't sort of meet the moment of that those questions were aimed at. Let's go back to another bit of that interview.
Nigel Farage making claims that white lives matter, which is a slogan that was used by, the UK's largest white supremacist group. Are you happy with him using that phrase?
Kathy, what Nigel Farage said today was that white lives matter as much as black lives. Do you disagree with that statement?
You seem to be conducting an interview with me, but I'm trying to ask you the question.
I'm asking you whether you disagree with the statement
because
that
you're the
firstly,
politician.
I'm correcting. With respect, Kathy, I'm correcting you on this because to leave out the second half of the sentence, I think is deliberately misrepresentative and misleading. So Nigel said that white lives matter as much as black lives. And my question to you is, do you disagree with that statement? Clearly, it is unacceptable for anyone to be discriminated against based on immutable characteristics by the police or anybody else. But, Kathy, you've been conducting this interview on a premise that it is wholly inappropriate to watch that body cam footage and be furious. It is wholly inappropriate to conclude from watching that body cam footage that there should be some political ramifications for this. When in 2021, Kathy, you wrote op-ed after op-ed, article after article in newspapers like The Independent about George Floyd. In fact, and let me quote you your own words. You said that you expressed delight that the BLM hashtag transported, and this is a direct quote from you, Kathy, transported the rage of George Floyd's death across the four corners of the globe.
Zia,
so
I've said
the point
to
that we
you,
are making
Zia,
is that
I've said to you,
a totally
I understand
different
people
reaction,
are angry,
a totally
but
different reaction, a totally different reaction, Kathy, not just from you. I'm only putting that to you because I'm speaking to you now, but I'm afraid this has been endemic across most of the media landscape in this country and the institutions in this country.
Barry, I'm going to come to you on this. You know, when I watch an interview like that, I sort of think, actually, these journalists are going to need to up their game. They're going to really need to find a way to respond to the kinds, to understand the kinds of ways that reform politicians like Zia Youssef are going to steer the narrative on these topics. You know, because the narrative is all they've got, right? So they've got to really cling to it, and these journalists have got to get much better at disrupting that. You know, there are so many things I think that Newman could have said about. I mean, if she had a chance, of course, about her articles that she wrote about Black Lives Matter. I mean, I haven't read any of them. But yeah, I mean, what do you make of this way in which, well, first of all, thinking of them as politicians who are trying to be in government, but also just in how the media should be tackling them, be holding them to account?
I have high blood pressure, and
no, he's going to have a heart attack.
That interview really did not help. It's maddening, and I don't want to be unprofessional, but Zia Youssef is proving himself to be an eminently unlikable, smarmy, and atrocious person in all of the interviews that he gives on television and his appearances on Question Time. And you're right, he is not engaging with the media in good faith. It's bad enough that it's very clear that they've exploited this murder and that horrible police ineptitude that led to the death of Henry Nowak. It's bad enough that they exploited it. It's worse that they're now out there defending it. Why are they willingly going out to defend it and then not playing ball with the journalists? I mean, speaking as a journalist, I always used to think that when politicians came out and acted very media trained, which we've seen, with the mainstream parties in this country. So, sometimes there'll be an absurd interview where a politician will come out with a brief, he'll be asked a question or she'll be asked a question, and they'll regurgitate the script that they've been given. They'll be asked another question. They'll say that again. They'll be asked another question. They'll say that again. What I always thought journalists should do in the face of that was just shut down the interview and then air them shutting the interview down by just saying, listen, if you're going to continue to repeat the same line, there's really no point in talking to you. So let's just wrap it up there and expose to the audience that game that they play. I also think that Kathy Newman has every right there to say to Zia Youssef, listen, if you keep asking me questions, we might as well just end the interview and stop it right there. I think that's how it should be dealt with because, otherwise a guy like him is just going to run rings around the media. And Kathy Newman's a very experienced interviewer. Shut them down. Don't play the game. Refuse them interviews because also they thrive on airtime. I think they'll soon change their ways if they think that they're not going to get airtime.
Yeah, I think maybe, I think that those very experienced journalists are often so accustomed to there being a kind of attitude towards the media that normal politicians will have, where there's a sort of, there's a symbiotic relationship, right? So they're going to get something, and so they'll give something in exchange, and there's a kind of chumminess about like what the norms are and, all of that. But obviously Reform aren't playing that game at all. And in some ways, it's sort of like with Trump, right? Journalists in the US who weren't from Fox learned pretty quickly that they had to deal with Trump in quite a different way. And it eventually became quite an obsequious kind of way at various points. And that's because Trump had Fox News, who would just air him all the time. And here they've got GB News, who's going to air them all the time. So they don't need to give, their base is watching that channel already. They don't really, obviously they want to win over more people. I'm not sure an interview like that is going to win over many people who aren't already won over to Reform. But they've already got a kind of captive audience where they can speak to them directly without having to go through places like Sky or the BBC, right?
So it's access, and I think that's pathetic, that journalists are more worried about access than holding politicians to account and not allowing politicians to play their game. The reason that US journalists, not that, the White House press corps, to be honest, has always been a little bit forelock tugging no matter who the president is. But the reason that they've become so obsequious is because they know that if they push too hard, they'll be kicked out of the press room. They know that if they push too hard, they won't travel on Air Force One. They know that if they push too hard, they'll lose their seat at the Pentagon. And so we've had the really unedifying sight, by the way, of seeing Trump regularly attacking usually female journalists at press gaggles or press conferences, and all of their colleagues standing around saying nothing. Now, when I was a news reporter, I have been at press conferences where a journalist was attacked and we would stand up. And, you know, years ago, there was a sort of an almost unspoken rule that I've seen in action several times while attending press conferences, where if a journalist asked a question and the person refused to answer that question and went to another journalist, that journalist would ask the same question. And that was solidarity. And that was saying, we're not going to let them play a game with us. And we just don't see that anymore. But I think I disagree with you on one slight point there. I do think Reform want to be on mainstream television. I do think they want to be on Sky News. I do think they want to be on Question Time. And you're right. They do have the power to communicate more directly, and they do have GB News. But as you say, I think to be elected, they do need to be on the mainstream channels. And we could argue that they wouldn't be in the position that they're in right now if Farage, you know, didn't have basically a chair at Question Time with his name written on in Tipex on the back of it.
Yeah.
So...
Yeah, okay. So what we need to see journalists like Cathy Newman doing is leveraging the desire that they have to be on those broader platforms and shutting it down if she's not getting the kinds of interview that are actually going to be productive.
That's how I see it.
Yeah. Now, Nigel Farage did appear at Prime Minister's Questions this morning, where he spoke about the murder of Henry Nowak.
It is now clear to growing millions in this country that we're living under two-tier policing. The instructions that are given to police officers from police bosses are clear and written down in ink. It says you must treat different ethnic groups in different ways. That, apart from the upset and the anger at the circumstances of his death, the anger that you saw spilling out in Southampton last night, and which is in danger.
Condemn the violence.
Which is in danger of getting considerably worse. Because if the public lose trust.
Condemn it.
If the public lose trust in being treated fairly by the police, can he take some action, end this divisive practice of two-tier policing, and make sure that all British citizens are treated the same?
So you saw there that despite MPs calling on Farage to at least condemn the violence in Southampton, he wouldn't do it. So that's a sitting MP, an elected lawmaker, refusing to criticise law-breaking in which 11 police officers who had nothing to do with Nowak's death were injured. This was Prime Minister Keir Starmer's response to that.
Mr. Speaker, I don't believe there's two-tier policing in this country. I'm really shocked that he pretends to have respect for Henry's family and then acts in this way. They are a grieving family.
Mr. Blash, please, it's a very important question. I want to hear the Prime Minister. If you want to carry on, go outside, please, Prime Minister.
The grieving family have asked us not to respond in the way that the Leader of Reform has responded. They've asked us not to. They have lost their son in the most appalling circumstance. They make a simple plea of us as human beings to please not exploit that. That is their plea to us. We all need to reflect on those words of Henry's father. My response, and the response of others, to be fair, has been focused on the lessons to be learned so we can deliver justice. His response has been to appeal for rage. Rage. That's his response to a father who's lost his son and asked for that not to happen. Exploiting this tragedy, create grievance and division, would be wrong in any circumstances, but to do it when the family are expressly saying, please don't, is unforgivable. It shows exactly who he is.
So that looked to me like a little bit of a grim smirk from Farage when Starmer brought up Henry Nowak's father. which, if true, says it all for me. Barry, Nigel Farage turned up for work for once in the House of Commons. Do you think it could have anything to do with the news cycle and the cameras?
Oh, let me think. Yeah. There you go. What we're talking about him being hungry to be on camera. Keir Starmer was absolutely spot on in everything he said there. Spot on in everything that he said there. Like we said earlier, Farage, Yousaf, Reform, and others are exploiting this tragedy. They're willfully ignoring the family. And I think that that's one of the most objectionable things that they're doing here. Because what it seems to underline to me is that they're not centering Henry Nowak here. He's a pawn. His killing is a pawn. They're not centering his family's wishes. They're riding roughshod over his family's wishes. They don't care about his family. I'll tell you who else they don't care about. They don't care about the people who went out and rioted last night, right? If there were people who'd been rabble-roused to go and gather at that police station because of what Nigel Farage said, he does not care. Those people, because a lot of them were idiots, didn't mask up, are perfectly identifiable, and we're going to see a lot of them arrested. And we might see a lot of them go to prison. Nigel Farage doesn't care about that. Zia Yousaf doesn't care about that. Nigel Farage and Zia Yousaf are going to continue to swan around, rabble-rousing, and if another such incident comes along, you bet your bottom dollar that they will do the exact same, that they will respond the exact same way. Because that's the thing. Like, they're hoodwinking working class people in this country. They are not the party of the working class. They are a party of the elites. We saw that interview that Zia Yousaf did with Sky News. It looked like he was doing it from the back of a chauffeur-driven car. He was being driven around in a fancy car, given this interview on Sky News. They're a party that, if they get power, they are going to serve the wealthy. They are going to introduce policies that will not help those people who were on the streets in Southampton last night. Do the people who were on the streets in Southampton last night, or do the people who support reform from poorer backgrounds, know that they have a bunch of tax breaks planned for the wealthy? Do they know that they want to reduce the minimum wage for young people? This is not their party. They're not only exploiting the murder, they're not only ignoring the family, but they're exploiting the people who went out and protested.
And I can tell you exactly how this is going to play out, because Farage, of course, he doesn't condemn those protests, but he's not going to save anybody who goes to prison. And if people do go to jail for any period of time, they will then themselves become the victims of two-tier policing, the victims of anti-white bias in the police, because people will then say, well, during the Black Lives Matter protests during COVID, nobody went to prison over those. And, you know, the people who pushed the Colston statue into the Bristol Harbour, they didn't, you know, they were prosecuted, but they were exonerated, acquitted. So that is exactly how it's going to go on. There's these things, whatever happens to those protesters who won't be protected, some will probably end up with sentences of some kind. They will be made into martyrs for this claim that there is anti-white bias in the police and in the criminal justice system.
Yeah, we'll have a new bunch of Lucy Connollys, I guess. I
Exactly
think you're absolutely spot on, and it's hard to combat. But you know, look, I think that's why people in politics need to aggressively confront reform, like Starmer did today. Enough of placating them. Enough of trying to cleave a little bit to the right because you're worried that you're going to lose votes to reform. No, the right strategy. And you know, in a way, the right strategy politically, I think, is to stand up to them. But that's not even the most important thing. Like, screw politics and screw political games. The right thing for the country is to stand up to them. And I think that's what we need to see more of from mainstream politicians and the mainstream media as well.
Journalism is under constant threat, whether it's the use of strategic lawfare against public participation suits, also known as SLAPs, or increasingly onerous government legal frameworks around political activism. A journalist can land in a lot of trouble, financial, criminal, and even, believe it or not, terror-related in this country, if they go wrong. That is all very expensive. Not, though, if you're a billionaire. And they, it seems, are busy finding new ways to make reporting the truth as difficult as possible. Novara Media's Harriet Williamson has reported on how a new startup, funded by Palantir co-founder Peter Thiel, will provide a platform the super rich can use to target journalists. This is from Harriet's article. Objection AI is a new software platform funded by billionaire Palantir co-founder Peter Thiel and crypto investor Balaji Srinivasan that will allow AI models to adjudicate on the truthfulness of journalists' work. It was created by Australian businessman Aaron D'Souza, founder of the Enhanced Games, a multi-sport event where athletes can use performance-enhancing drugs. Objection was launched last month as a pay-to-play platform where, for a starting price of $2,000, anyone who feels they've been unfairly reported on can file a complaint against a journalist's story. Now, Objection AI has temporarily shut down, with their website saying, quote, due to feedback, we're rebuilding for an epistemic and primary source future. Stay tuned for updates. But before that happened, they did release this ad.
Journalists ruined your reputation, not with evidence, with a narrative. And when they come for you, there's no way to fight back. Until now. Introducing Objection, the first AI tribunal. Former CIA and FBI agents will investigate. They gather evidence and make it public, permanently. The AI tribunal checks the record and renders the verdict. You can save your reputation in days, not years. From the team that bankrupted Gawker, mastermind Aaron D'Souza and investor Peter Thiel, comes Objection. Truth isn't what goes viral, it's verified. File an objection.
Like, I really hope this is like an elaborate hoax, and that we've fallen for it and we've played this ad as though it's a real company, because it is so dystopian. This idea that AI and former FBI agents will be looking into journalists on behalf of billionaires. I mean, billionaires can already get former FBI agents to do that if they want to. Now, look, the idea of an AI jury determining the veracity of a story has led to more than a few raised eyebrows. One of those is the suggestion that Peter Thiel is building a parallel justice system, one that operates outside of democratic institutions and is, of course, available only to the very wealthy. Now, in her article, Harriet has a little detail on how it's supposed to work. She writes this. Objection also reportedly considers stories that use anonymous sources as less trustworthy and puts anonymous whistleblower claims near the bottom of its ranking system. The use of unnamed sources is a valuable part of public interest journalism and allows the exposure of wrongdoing by powerful interests without compromising the employment and personal safety of whistleblowers. Protecting the identity of sources who supply information in confidence is a key journalistic principle. Objection can, in theory, be applied to any published content, including social media posts and podcasts. But the main focus is written articles. It will invite journalists to defend their reporting, but if they don't, the verdict is issued and published online anyway. Now, I guess the effectiveness of this sort of website, this AI, will just depend on how far it reaches and how seriously people take it. But something tells me that billionaires probably have like a little club where they back each other up on these things. So the next thing you know, you'll get Objection.ai sort of integrated into Twitter or something. In an interview with TechCrunch, Aaron D'Souza was asked about the chilling effect this could have on whistleblowing and source-based journalism in general. They reported this. D'Souza says Objection is not an attempt to silence whistleblowers. It's an attempt to fact-check. It's the same as X's community notes, the wisdom of the crowd plus the power of technology to create new methods of truth-telling. When asked if Objection could make it harder for media to publish important stories holding power to account, he said, if it raises the standards of transparency and trust, that's a good thing. Barry, you're a journalist of long standing, having worked many places. What do you make of this new AI tribunal that journalists will have to face if they publish anything that potentially disrupts the business or the reputation of the rich and powerful?
Well, if Objection is only as good as that absurd AI slop ad we saw from them, then I think we'll be fine. But no, I think it's a word that's overused. But this is genuinely dystopian stuff. I mean, there were some things that jumped out at me from Harriet's article. There was one thing that it said that it was billed as letting anyone fight the press like a billionaire, which is pretty dystopian. And I think that Peter Thiel and Aaron D'Souza, but Peter Thiel and Palantir in particular, are almost comically evil people. And this is not a first for Peter Thiel. Yes, this AI system is a first. But back in, it's more than 10 years ago now, right? He had a plan which he hatched with Aaron D'Souza, actually, where he wanted to bring down a website called Gawker, which at the time was a sort of a gossipy, celebrity-focused website that was very popular, run out of New York. And they had been publishing stories about Peter Thiel, which had made him very angry. I do want to say one of them was they outed him as gay, which I don't think there's any justification for doing that. It would be something that I would absolutely disagree with running as a story. But would I agree with a billionaire then going behind the scenes to shut down that news organization? No, because that's what he did. He did it secretly. He funded several people who were suing Gawker for various things, most notably Hulk Hogan, who, if you're of my vintage, you may have watched wrestling in the 1980s as a kid. Hulk Hogan was suing Gawker because they had published a sex tape featuring him. Peter Thiel, in the background, fully secretly, funded Hulk Hogan's case.
It was Aaron D'Souza's idea to do it, apparently.
It was Aaron D'Souza's idea. Hulk Hogan was awarded $140 million in damages, and Gawker shut down. D'Souza has said somewhere, I can't remember exactly where, but I've seen a quote where D'Souza essentially implies that Gawker and what happened to Gawker is the blueprint. So, let's be clear. They're looking to bring media organizations down. These are people who are incredibly aggressive towards the media. D'Souza has also been quoted somewhere else saying that in 20 years, he doesn't see any reason why journalists should exist. Also, you had mentioned there that, this all comes at a time when journalism is under threat. It's never been under threat before. I want to say immediately here that the biggest threat to journalism is the fact that it's now been normalized primarily by Israel to target and kill journalists. According to CPJ, last year, 129 journalists got killed because they were journalists. Now, that's not only in Gaza, but it's primarily in Gaza. And since October 7th, Israel has killed more than 270 Palestinian journalists. So that's the first threat. But there are also legal threats and threats like this. The other thing you mentioned was what are known as slaps. And I actually worked for an organization that researched the use of these. And it's becoming increasingly common. What it is it's a lawsuit that is entirely designed to just tie journalists up or tie activist groups up in litigation and to drain them slowly financially. So slaps are embarked upon by wealthy people and by governments, not necessarily with any expectation that they will win, but with an expectation that they can kill you with that. I think that it's been documented.
The killing, not the winning, that matters. Right?
Exactly. And it's been documented that slaps have now been used in 41 countries, including the UK, by the way. And last year, according to researchers, about 1,300 cases identified as slaps were used. It's scary. It's a really scary time.
It's very scary. And, one of the things that Peter Thiel says about that Gawker case, and I remember it well because I was a huge fan of Gawker. Yeah. I used to read it every single day. And that was Gawker was the website that reported on New York, gossip and who was doing what in the New York media scene or in the TV, film, theater scene. But that was just one of a whole series of sites that belonged to the Gawker network, right? And I read a lot of them, like Gizmodo or Jezebel. And Peter Thiel will often say, "Oh no, he did that law site against Gawker because it was such a breach of privacy to out him." It was a breach of privacy, but his aim wasn't to just publish Gawker, the website that did it. It brought down the entire group. Those sites all had to be sold off, and some of them were doing really good journalism, which is why they still survive. They were bought by other people and managed to, Jezebel, for example, managed to keep going. So that was really about tearing down an entire journalistic network, not just a single site that had, which had its own team that had breached his privacy so heinously. Okay, well, on the question of journalism, if you tuned in last night, you'll have heard the big news Aaron shared. A few weeks ago, we launched a fundraiser to bring in 2,000 new regular supporters to help us take our biggest leap yet into a new studio so that we can really expand our reporting ahead of the next general election. The response has been incredible. More than 3,000 of you have already signed up to support our work, taking us well beyond our original target and 60% of the way towards our stretch goal of 5,000 regular supporters. That means we're just 2,000 supporters away from hitting that stretch target. That's the very best target for us beyond our original target. Reaching it would put us in the strongest possible position to accelerate our plans and invest even more in the journalism we know is needed right now. Also the protections of our own journalism that we know is going to be needed in the future if Peter Thiel gets his way. We're living through a pivotal moment in British politics, and the need for independent, reliable reporting has never, and honestly, it has never been so important. We're ambitious about what comes next, and we have no intention of slowing down. Whether you've been with us for years or have only recently discovered our work, we'd be hugely grateful for your support. If 2,000 people signed up to contribute just £1 a month today, it would make a transformative difference to what we're able to achieve over the coming months and years. Please join our regular supporters today at novara.media/support. On yesterday's show, we covered Emily Thornberry's criticisms of the Labour government over its weak reaction to Israel's genocide in Gaza. Ironic, of course, given that in October 2023, while Shadow Attorney General, Thornberry defended Israel's right to cut off food and water to the civilian population of Gaza, in direct contradiction to international law. Well, Thornberry seems to have kicked off a trend, with former Health Secretary Wes Streeting now criticising his own record on the genocide too. He's now given a statement to The Guardian in which he describes raising concerns over Gaza in government as like hitting up against a brick wall. The context for Streeting's intervention is an exchange between him and disgraced former US Ambassador Peter Mandelson. In one message sent in July 2025, Streeting told Mandelson this: Israel is committing war crimes before our eyes. The government talks the language of ethnic cleansing, and I have met with our own medics out there who describe the most chilling and distressing scenes of calculated brutality against women and children. This is rogue state behavior. Let them pay the price as pariahs, with sanctions applied to the state, not just a few ministers. Now, Mandelson kind of brushed Streeting's message off in their exchange, but he commented on them to Work and Pensions Secretary Pat McFadden in another series of texts, saying this about Streeting. By the way, I received a wild, long, hysterical message from Wes about Israel. I pushed back. I can forward, but reflects pretty badly on his maturity, in my view. It's pathetic. I think Wes is experiencing an early midlife crisis. Now, in their exchange, Mandelson kind of brushed Streeting's messages off, but he commented on them to Work and Pension Secretary Pat McFadden in another series of texts, saying this: in government, I did everything I could behind the scenes to get the government to act with the moral urgency the conflict demands. That included sharing the eyewitness testimony of doctors on the ground in Gaza, whose accounts needed to be heard at the highest level of government to ensure that what was happening in Gaza wasn't a war without witnesses. I wasn't by any means the only cabinet minister pushing for action, but we often felt like we were hitting up against a brick wall. Our concerns and motives were dismissed. I've always supported Israel's right to defend itself and Palestinians' right to a state of their own. I've met survivors of October 7th and was the first shadow cabinet minister to visit Israel. I visited the West Bank a decade ago. I called for sanctions on Israeli settlements when I was a backbencher. This wasn't some emotional or one-sided reaction. It is what I and other ministers believe. I was proud to be part of the government that eventually recognized a Palestinian state, but we took far too long to get there. Look, it seems to me that if you're a minister in a government at a time when a so-called ally is committing genocide, sharing some videos and a dossier of doctors' testimony is pretty much the bare minimum you could do. And that bare minimum, I would say, gets very quickly erased when you're spending your time in the public eye defending Israel or attacking those protesting in support of Palestine. This was Streeting on Newsnight in late October 2023, rejecting the idea of an immediate ceasefire in Gaza.
Hang on, the UN says it's breaking international law. Amnesty says it's breaking international law. The Red Cross says it's breaking international law.
Well, and Israel needs to act within international law, but any
organisations saying it's already breaking it.
Accusations where Israel is accused of breaking international law need to be properly investigated. And I think particularly when it comes to accusations, for example, of the use of white phosphorus, that is prohibited under international law. When it comes to specific targets, schools, hospitals, they are protected under international law. The complication in international law comes in when Hamas are using those buildings as facilities to launch attacks. But in terms of the scale of civilian loss of life, I well understand why people are calling for an immediate ceasefire, but we've got to be really realistic about this. When you've got Hamas that is threatening to carry out the same sort of attacks again and again, and an Israeli government that says we've got to take out Hamas, we're not going to see a ceasefire soon enough to save lives. Humanitarian pauses could save lives.
At that point in the genocide, where many people were calling for an immediate ceasefire and Streeting was calling for a humanitarian pause, nearly 10,000 Palestinians had already been killed in Gaza. In January 2024, South Africa took Israel to the International Court of Justice over the claim that it was committing genocide. This was Streeting's view at the time.
All right, on Gaza, you rejected the idea of a ceasefire. The South Africans have gone to the International Court of Justice in pursuit of a ruling which would have that effect. David Cameron's told me this morning he thinks that's just wrong. Do you agree?
I think it's a distraction from what needs to happen, which is the diplomatic heavy lifting to bring about an end to this conflict. Respect the International Court of Justice. It's for them to make decisions and judgments in relation to South Africa's
But you don't think it's wrong for the South Africans really to raise this issue?
It's a matter for the South African government. They're perfectly entitled to. The ICJ needs to hear their application and weigh up the evidence. But I actually think the priority here has got to be trying to get to where we were actually some months ago now, which is a humanitarian pause in fighting and the diplomatic heavy lifting to bring about the conditions for a sustainable ceasefire, which is what we all want to see. And you look at the...
So, basically what West Streeting is doing at every stage there is just pushing the government line, which is, no ceasefire. Israel has the right to defend itself, even though, 10,000 people were already dead in Gaza by the end of the 1st of October. ICJ, a waste of time. But suddenly in 2025, when a ceasefire is actually just about to happen, and when pressure is finally being put on Israel, that's when Streeting is apparently sending around the dossier and the photographs and videos and stuff. I mean, it just doesn't really make a lot of sense to me insofar as the timeline goes. We had all this. We know at 2024, when that second video was recorded, rather, that the ICJ was that South Africa was appearing at the ICJ, and if you listen to any of that case, they just roll out such a huge amount of evidence of genocide taking place in Gaza at that point. They talk about prevention of childbirth, and they talk about mass displacement and starvation and indiscriminate bombing. All of the many things that have to be marked off in order for something to count as a genocide. So that is all known at that point. That's all in those files. And there's no saying that, Britain didn't know about it, because as we know from Declassified, Britain has been flying spy flights over Gaza this entire time. And as some of the good people at Declassified have often put it, that is probably one of the greatest archives of genocide ever recorded, those flights, which will not be, the government refuses to share or release. And of course, it's only a few months down the line, in April of 2024, that British citizens are killed in Gaza when Israel deliberately strikes a convoy of the World Central Kitchen. And yet it's more than a year later that Streeting is texting Mandelson saying, oh, it's really awful, isn't it? We must recognize the state of Palestine. Now, I don't want to say, Barry, I think it's really important to say that, it's good when politicians change their minds. It's good when they come out and say, actually, I was trying to do something and I resigned over it because I couldn't do it. But, that's not what's happened here. What's happened here is Streeting has resigned at a certain point, which is politically opportune for him when the Prime Minister is weak. And now we're getting a revelation about, what an amazing advocate he was for Palestinians while he was in government. Thornberry, of course, has not been in government for a while. Very interesting timing that it was just, Monday night that she made the comments about her own views on the government's treatment of Palestinians and their failure to protect Gazans. What do you make of the politics of this? What is going on here with the timing? And should we just accept that actually perhaps in these cases, politicians really have been trying inside the government, and they've just sort of been knocked back and therefore just continued with their jobs and thought, hey, there's nothing I can do.
No. This is a genocide we're talking about. This isn't some sort of minor policy issue. This is one of the greatest atrocities and international crimes of our generation. The Palestinian writer, Omar al-Akkad, coined a phrase, one day everyone will have always been against this, which has now kind of become part of the lexicon of the pro-Palestine movement. And I think that's what we're seeing here. we're seeing exactly that. We're seeing Wes Streeting. And let's remind ourselves that Wes Streeting only kept his seat in Ilford by about 550 votes in the last election, coming second to the wonderful Leanne Mohammed, who was running against him basically over Gaza.
Yeah, it's like a fraction of a percent, right? Or something like that.
Nothing.
It's very, very low, yeah.
So, okay, let's take at face value that Wes Streeting was angry behind the scenes. By the way, a long time into the genocide. So let's take at face value that he was angry behind the scenes. But did he also go on television after tens of thousands of Palestinian women, men, and children had been slaughtered and say that Israel had the right to defend himself? Yes, he did. Did he also go on television and trot out the line that Hamas uses civilians as human shields? Yes, he did. Did he also go on television and trot out the more heinous line that Hamas launches attacks from hospitals and schools? Yes, he did. He did that. In 2003, former Foreign Secretary Robin Cook resigned from Tony Blair's cabinet over the invasion of Iraq. At the time, I think he was leader of the House. That's a conviction politician. That's somebody who's willing to say, I'm going to walk away from cabinet. I'm going to walk away from my career. That's how much I object to this. Wes Streeting could have done that if he felt so strongly. He could have resigned. Did he resign? No, he didn't resign. Why? Because Wes Streeting is at heart a careerist who has never demonstrated in his career that he actually believes in anything much at all. So the fact of the matter is that, like every other Labour government minister, he ran cover for a genocide and he should never be allowed to wriggle away from that or forget it.
Yeah, Wes Streeting would rather resign over local election results than a genocide, basically. Right?
Yeah.
The Makerfield by-election is just a couple of weeks away. It'll be there that current Mayor of Manchester, Andy Burnham, will try to find his way back to Parliament and possibly onto the leadership of the Labour Party. His main challenger at the moment is Reform UK's Robert Kenyon, a local plumber turned local councillor, as well as a former army reservist. Now, just last week, some of Kenyon's old tweets turned up after an archived version of the deleted account was uncovered. And a few of them have garnered a lot of attention. So here, after someone rebukes a user for posting an extremely sexually explicit message about Carol Vorderman, Kenyon replies with, "He's only saying what we're all thinking, Chris." In another sexist post, quizzed on his sudden interest in politics, Kenyon reports that, quote, "If it's not tits and arse or rugby, it's politics." Meanwhile, in late 2023, he's also telling Chris Whitty, the chief medical officer, to fuck right off over his calls for people to go and get a booster jab during COVID. But perhaps the most damaging for his current political prospects as a Reform politician is a series of posts around Brexit. They're not from an old Twitter account, but from a rugby messaging board. Here's one of those posts written in 2019. "So anyone who thinks I love Trump, voted Brexit, read the Daily Mail, live in the 1950s, and a Tory and 103 is wrong. I'm none of the above." In a later post, the account also wrote that they, quote, "woke up the day after breakfast, shitting myself to what was voted for." But they also said that the EU's treatment of Britain after the vote made them, quote, "glad we voted out." In another post, the account said it would rejoin the EU tomorrow if the bloc was, quote, "stripped right back to what it was set up for." So basically, an admission there that Robert Kenyon, Reform candidate in Makerfield, did not vote in favour of Brexit. Well, Robert Kenyon has finally addressed these posts in an interview with the BBC's Chris Mason, and some are billing it as the worst interview ever. Too harsh? Decide for yourself.
I spoke to Andy Burnham recently and scrutinised what he'd said in the past and whether he'd changed his mind about various things. So let's do the same with you. And we'll start with some policies. You have said that Russia was well within its rights to invade Crimea, part of Ukraine. That'll sound to some people, won't it, like you're sympathetic to Vladimir Putin?
Absolutely not, Chris. I've served in the Army Reserve since, and I'm totally against the illegal annexation of Crimea.
So you changed your mind on that?
Things have happened since. People change their opinions on things. And
let's talk about Brexit. You said that the Leave campaign peddled nationalistic pish during the Brexit referendum. Did you back Brexit? Did you vote for Brexit?
100%, and on that, Chris, I voted for Brexit.
So who was peddling nationalistic pish? I mean, some critics of your party leader, Nigel Farage, would accuse him of that.
No, to be honest, I don't even know what context. I'm not sure what nationalistic pish means. If I'm
well, you tell me. You wrote it.
I've no recollection of saying that.
You sounded sceptical about COVID vaccines and in particular boosters. In fact, you told England's chief medical officer to get lost, or you put it a bit more bluntly than that. But I think you got the jabs yourself. So is it responsible to have been saying that kind of stuff whilst you were getting the jabs yourself?
Well, I want to make one thing perfectly clear. I'm not anti-vax or anti-jabs. I had my first lot of COVID jabs, but
you were telling England's chief medical officer to get lost.
wasn't a polite thing to say. I weren't involved in politics back then. I speak like the normal bloke does. You go in a pub, we're in a pub now, you go into the next room, speak to local people. I think you'll hear a lot worse than what I've said on Twitter.
Let's do a bit of scrutiny on your character, because part of standing for an MP is people getting a sense of who you are as a candidate and as a person. You made sexual remarks about Carol Vorderman.
Sorry, I have not made sexual remarks about Carol Vorderman. Somebody else did, but then I responded with a crass joke about that comment. So I didn't make the comment.
Carol Vorderman said what you'd said was disgusting. There's a pattern around some of the remarks you've said in the past that have sounded like they were degrading women.
There might have been a few crass comments. If I'm as an elected public official, which I am now, I wouldn't make any crass comments because everything you do say is under a microscope. But comments that are made before I was involved in politics, you'll be judged in the future by what you say.
It has such a kind of like the kind of sort of not too bad schoolboy who gets caught up with the bad crowd and gets hauled in to answer for his misdemeanors. What do you think, Barry? Disastrous pish or not disastrous pish?
Pretty disastrous, and loving the constant use of the word pish on the BBC. Very, very entertaining. But just, a total bloody car crash. I saw somebody saying on Twitter yesterday, though, this is why we shouldn't have ordinary people become politicians. Listen, I completely disagree with that. What we shouldn't have is careerist politicians who go from a student union and to the party and to become a minister. That's what we shouldn't have. We should have ordinary people getting involved in politics who've lived a life and lived within a community before they've become politicized. That's not the lesson to take from this. The lesson to take from this is that when you select ordinary people to run for parliament, they shouldn't be total idiots. I mean, look at the difference between him and Hannah Spencer, who went from a plumber to a member of parliament and was incredibly articulate and understood the issues inside out and is going to make a fine representative, and reforms clearly atrocious pick. I also think he could have styled a few of those things out. Like, it was just that, on the sort of the U-turns, you were saying earlier on that, it's actually sort of a good thing when a politician can reflect and explain why they might have changed their minds. On the serious ones, he could have done that. And on the silly ones, he could have just said, that was ridiculous. I was immature, right? So he was even rubbish at sort of responding to them. He's clearly a bad candidate.
Yeah, I mean, look, I actually went through that whole Twitter account, the old one. It took me ages. I spent a couple of late nights going through his old tweets. And, there are the ones we've shown there. There are some ones that I think, are like, if he had been an elected politician at the time, would have been like really disastrous for him. And actually they reflect maybe something in him that means that he's not going to make a good politician. And, that would be for people to decide, whether they vote or not. But on the whole, like, his tweets were mostly 95% about the local rugby league team, like mostly, the Wigan Warriors, I think they're called. But I did have this thought at the time of like, actually, I think it's very, very important that we have more ordinary people in Parliament. Yeah. I think it's really, really important that people see themselves represented in Parliament, not necessarily because of things like accent or, that sort of thing, but background is like really, really important, I think. Like having a common sort of understanding of what it's like to live under certain conditions, which are not the conditions that most of our politicians lived under. So, yeah, I think it's really, really, really important. And, I think, as you say, he could have styled some of these out. He could have done a better job of. I mean, some like I think are actually pretty unacceptable. But some he could have, he could have like the Chris Whitty tweet. He could have just said, "Well, look, I was just going mad at home. Like I'd had a massive economic hit during lockdown. I was self-employed or whatever.
Telling someone to fuck off on Twitter should not bar you from running for office.
Right, exactly. It's a sort of strongly worded opinion in some ways. Other things, which are like gender-based, I think are like really inexcusable. And I think I would have liked to have seen maybe a much stronger apology for that, and just a deep expression of regret. But it looks like actually a theme for this show is that Reform's not actually capable of expressing regret, not regret for the words that they say that drive people out onto the streets, not condemnation for the actions of those people on the streets, and not even regret for tweets that some of their candidates made in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. What a way to wrap up. Look what you did.
There we go. Tied it all together in a nice bow. Barry, thank you very much for joining me tonight.
Thanks, Stephen. It was a pleasure.
I've been Stephen Methven. You've been watching Novara Live. Thank you all for tuning in. Come back tomorrow for another live stream from 6 p.m. Good night.